Hey folks, Mother's Day is right around the corner, and if you're looking for the perfect gift to celebrate the moms in your life, Aura frames are a beautiful Wi-Fi connected digital picture frame that allow you to share and display unlimited photos. It's super easy to upload and share photos with the Aura app, and if you're going to, or if you're going to give Aura as a gift, you can even personalize the frame with pre-loaded photos and memories. So it doesn't just need to be for your mom, it can be for your grandmother or your grandparent, where they might not be hip to a digital frame and it might be difficult for them to do it themselves. Well, you can preload the photos for them and it's extremely easy. From grandmothers to new mothers, aunts, and even the friends in your life, every mom loves an Aura frame. Named the best digital photo frame by Wirecutter, Aura frames are guaranteed to bring joy to moms of all ages. I gave my mom an Aura frame, and it has photos from when I was a baby with her and recent ones, and that's the kind of gift, honestly, that moms appreciate more than anything because it shows you care and it's sentimental. Right now, Aura has a great deal for Mother's Day. Listeners can save on the perfect gift by visiting auraframes.com/majority to get $30 off plus free shipping on their best-selling frame. That's Aura, A-U-R-A, frames.com/majority. Use code majority at checkout to save. Terms and conditions apply. And now, time for the show.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Wednesday, April 24th, 2024. My name is Emma Vigeland, in for Sam Seder, and this is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Jeremy Gantz, contributing editor of In These Times, joins us to discuss the various union-busting tactics by companies like Starbucks, REI, and Trader Joe's. And later in the show, Tenants rights attorney Leah Goodridge will be with us to talk about rent stabilization efforts and tenants' rights in New York City and broadly. Also on the program, Pennsylvania incumbents stave off primary challenges in yesterday's election, including Summer Lee, who beat her pro-Israel challenger by 20 points. Biden and Trump won their respective primaries easily, but tens of thousands wrote in uncommitted, and Nikki Haley, despite dropping out, still got 155,000 votes. In Trump's trial, the former National Enquirer publisher testifies he promised Trump he'd be his eyes and ears for damaging stories. And Trump may be held in contempt for being seemingly constitutionally incapable of abiding by the gag order. The Senate passes Israel, Ukraine, and Taiwan aid. Only 3 Democrats voted against it: Bernie, Peter Welch, and Jeff Merkley. More bodies and mass graves were uncovered in Gaza, both at Nasser Hospital and Al-Shifa. A reminder that, again, the death toll is a massive undercount and more bodies will be found, or won't be. The rest of the world pleads for an independent investigation into this. Biden expands overtime pay requirements, raising the salary threshold. Millions will benefit. The Labor Department also got Wall Street pissed for announcing stricter rules for 401k management. Elon Musk makes more bold promises, also known as lies, about self-driving taxis because Tesla has been reporting massive losses. And what do you know? the stock price bumps up after he says, oh, they're just around the corner. We'll get to that in the fun half. I want to have some fun with that. The DOJ settles for $139 million over the FBI's failures to investigate USA Gymnastics doctor Larry Nassar, who victimized over 150 women and girls. The right-wing Supreme Court appears poised to side with Starbucks in its attack on the NLRB. Today, they're also hearing an Idaho case about hospitals performing emergency abortions. An Obama-appointed federal judge struck down a 19th century North Carolina law criminalizing voting while on parole. And lastly, Tennessee's legislature passes a law that would arm teachers, sending it to the Republican governor's desk. All this and more on today's Majority Report. Welcome to the show, everybody. I am contractually obligated to say it is Hump Day, and the rules of manners would oblige me to say hello to Bradley and Matt,
hello.
Even though I don't really want to.
I totally forgot it was Hump Day. It doesn't feel like Hump Day.
I know. It's
just shows
weird.
you completed finishing school, Emma.
I did. I have wonderful manners.
Proper deportment.
I am a lady, after all. It's almost as if I could have grown up in a cul-de-sac. I didn't. But something like a cul-de-sac. Anyway, by the way, last night I was at the Rangers game. That was my birthday gift. They're 2-0. The Knicks are 2-0. The Garden is Eden. New York City is back. It feels different in the city when the Knicks and Rangers are winning, and they're good and in the playoffs at the same time. So I just had to say that right off the bat.
Enjoy it while it lasts.
Hey, shut up.
Also, Wolves are 2-0.
Coming from a Minnesota fan, that's really rich.
It's just advice.
I know. Well, I have my own weird rules to not jinx anything, and we're not
You can't
going
say things
down.
like the.
Don't say it. Anyway, let's get into the actual news here, because Summer Lee is she's a force, and this speech that she gave, where she unequivocally in the tweet where she tweeted out this video, by the way, said the word genocide. Opposing genocide is good politics and good policy. And she's right to take a victory lap, because she basically beat her opponent, who was running on a pro-Israel platform, by 20 points.
Literally hitting Summer Lee for not denouncing the uncommitted campaign.
Unreal. Yeah. And, Ryan Grimm had a great piece on in The Intercept on her victory, showing how she has she hasn't backed down from a progressive left-wing policy platform in any way. She has endorsements from the DSA and from local unions. And also at the same time, she made relationships with people in Pennsylvania and other power players to cement herself as somebody that they could support. Ryan writes, what powered Lee to victory, interestingly, was not just her enthusiastic grassroots support or unapologetic radical politics, but also her ability to win over and, in some important cases, take over the party establishment. As a member of Congress, she helped bring back more than $1.2 billion in spending to benefit her district in her first term. Those investments helped her earn local establishment support, as those figures need a good relationship with their member of Congress if it looks like she'll be there for a while. Lee had the backing of Democrats up and down the ladder. Both sitting Democratic senators from Pennsylvania endorsed her, including John Fetterman, the most vocal supporter of Israel's assault on Gaza in the Senate, with whom she had an icy relationship with over the years, which now kind of makes it a little bit more clear why.
Yeah, and you can look into Fetterman's history, why maybe there's some other reasons for that.
Chasing people down with guns.
Yeah, being a big-time psycho.
For example. Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries, a tight ally of AIPAC, also endorsed her. So too did local unions. In other cases, Lee and her allies became the establishment. Sarah Innamorato was elected to the state legislature with Lee in 2018, with the Democratic Socialist duo shaking up Harrisburg together. Last cycle, Innamorato was elected Allegheny County Executive, the most powerful position in western Pennsylvania. Lee also helped elect progressive Pittsburgh Mayor Ed Gainey, which gave her a boost. Running for re-election with your allies in key positions of power is much easier than running solo against the machine. great context there from Ryan that, I wasn't fully aware of. She has powerful allies around her, and this is a real success story in Western Pennsylvania for the organized left. And it's also a real victory for people that support human rights and want to end the slaughter in Gaza. We have challenges coming up to Jamal Bowman from a pro-Israel candidate in the primary. Cori Bush is also under attack from many of these forces. And this is a good sign that Summerlee was able to come out with such a decisive victory. So
yeah, it would be, massively depressing if she would have lost to the Zionist plant or, a cheerleader.
And John from San Antonio said this yesterday, too, because like the Ilhan Omar primary challenge, she was expected to run away with it last time, and it was much closer. So than the polling anticipated. So Summerlee being this strong in her victory is just unequivocally good news. AIPAC actually did not spend on this race, interestingly, probably because they poured so much money in last time she was up for election and she still won. But a massive billionaire from Pennsylvania, Jeff Yass, basically funded this challenger's campaign. And he's a BFF of Benjamin Netanyahu and has been like one of the financial supporters of Netanyahu's controversial effort within Israel to overhaul the judiciary to give him less checks and balances. So this guy's not just an Israel supporter, he's like a Netanyahu supporter. Crazy man. And he lost. This is Summerlee's victory speech live streamed last night, so apologies for some of the quality, but I just thought this was incredibly rousing.
When we first ran, there were so many people who wanted to make this a referendum on just one issue. And I'm sorry, we're just going to get right into it. Because the reality is what the reality is. And there were a lot of people who wanted to convince us that we could not be pro-peace and win in this district. Our democracy to be reflective, and they want black people, and they want brown folks, and they want poor, and they want working class people to go to Congress. But when we get there, they want us to put our head down, and they want us to be silent, and they want us to do things the same way that has always been done. But this district has taught us over and over that we are ready for bold solutions. We are ready for courageous leaders who lift up the most marginalized and vulnerable. They want to see people who care about the downtrodden. They want to see people who are going to say that we deserve better, that we deserve everything that is ours, and in the richest nation on God's green earth, that there is no reason why anybody should be saying that it is extreme to believe that we should have clean air and clean water. It's extreme that we should have a house in the neighborhood that we call home, or that it's extreme that black and brown people should have equity and justice in our society, or that it's extreme that we should have a quality education and that you should be able to go to college without lifetime debt, or that's extreme that your kids should not drink lead water, or that it's extreme that our bridges shouldn't crumble, or that it's extreme that we can't stand up for each other, that each and every one of our communities don't have a stake in our own future, in each and all of our futures. We will not, and we have rejected in this district the false proposition that we are siloed or isolated, that our liberation is not tied together. We have rejected in this district that you can't be a bold progressive in Western Pennsylvania, because Western Pennsylvania, we say it all the time, is the blueprint for this nation. And here in Western Pennsylvania, we are showing what it looks like to lead with compassion. We're showing what it looks like to show up for the least of these. And when we have challenges in our region, because we know that this is not a perfect region, when we have challenges, we have demonstrated how we build coalitions.
So that's a bit of it there. She mentioned ceasefire, and that was the biggest applause line. And this is as close as it gets to basically a candidate electoral referendum on Gaza policy within the Democratic Party, within the Democratic primary. And it was immensely clear, it's reflective in polling, that Democrats overwhelmingly want Biden to change course. and that they are disapproving of the way that Netanyahu has been handling the war. I haven't seen updated polling on this, but the plurality position, literally months ago at this point, was that Israel was committing genocide within the Democratic voting base. So that's only going to have increased, especially since the deliberate starvation campaign began. This is where the party is going, and Summerlee and her ilk are the future, and Biden is a dinosaur in many ways.
We need more people to run like Summerlee who aren't afraid to actually move this forward. And it's not to say, like, look, Greg Kassar ducked to the issue when he was campaigning because it is an intimidating one for people who are in politics that can bring a lot of money against you. But we need to move into a new area where actually this is a way that we're something we're actually leaning into because it is a righteous cause and people recognize it as such.
We are going to get to our first guest in just a moment, but first, a word from our sponsors here. You know, some amazing, brilliant duos, Socrates and Plato, Lewis and Clark, Batman and Robin, Michael Jordan and Scottie Pippen. I'm all over that one.
Anthony Edwards and Jaden McDaniels.
Yes, some incredible duos. What about the perfect duo when it comes to growing your business? Well, that's you and Shopify. Shopify is the global commerce platform that helps you sell at every stage of your business. From the launch your online shop stage to the first real-life store stage, all the way to the did we just hit 1 million orders stage, Shopify is there to help you grow. Whether you're selling scented soap or offering outdoor gifts, Shopify helps you sell everywhere. From their all-in-one e-commerce platform to their in-person POS system, wherever and whatever you're selling, Shopify has got you covered. Shopify helps you turn browsers into buyers with the internet's best converting checkout 36% better on average compared to other leading commerce platforms. And I could just speak about this from personal experience using Shopify. It's because it's all in one place, basically. And it just makes it easy for you to order something if you want to buy and if you're interested in the product. The fact that Shopify makes it so easy helps, I just anecdotally, make a sale. Shopify powers 10% of all e-commerce in the US, and Shopify's the global force behind Allbirds, Rothy's, and millions of other entrepreneurs of every size across 175 countries. Plus, Shopify's award-winning help is there to support your success every step of the way, because businesses that grow with Shopify. Sign up for a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/majority, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/majority now to grow your business no matter what stage you're in. Shopify.com/majority, all lowercase. And lastly, did you know that Fast Growing Trees is the biggest online nursery in the United States with more than 10,000 different kinds of plants and over 2 million happy customers in the US? Well, now you do, because they have everything you could possibly want, like fruit trees, palm trees, evergreens, houseplants, that's what I got from Fast Growing Trees, and so much more. Whatever you're interested in, they have it for you. Find the perfect fit for your climate and space. Fast Growing Trees makes it easy to order online, and your plants are shipped directly to your door in 1 to 2 days. And along with their 30-day Alive and Thrive guarantee, they offer free plant consultation forever. Sam loves Fast Growing Trees for the trees, really. Like, he has a ton of... he has a green thumb, and he has more space to plant than I do, so he's all into the bloomerang trees and pear trees. He's got a green thumb, but for people like me that might be a little bit challenged in that area, and also I just have a small space that kind of gets sun, that works for the planting, I got one of their houseplants, one of those hanging, gosh, I should have looked it up what it's called now, because I forget. And I knew that I love it, and I knew that we have this this ad. But anyway, just trust me. It looks nice. It's perfect for my bookshelf, and Fast Growing Trees was really helpful in making me decide what plant works for me and also determining how I could take care of it. It gives me guidelines. You don't need to have a yard or a lot of space. You can go grow lemon, avocado, olive, or fig trees inside your home on top of the wide variety of houseplants available. The experts at Fast Growing Trees curate thousands of plants so you can find the perfect fit for your specific climate, location, and needs. You don't have to drive around to nurseries and big gardening centers. Fast Growing Trees makes it easy to order online, and your plants are shipped to your door in 1 to 2 days. Whether you're looking to add some privacy, shade, or natural beauty to your yard, Fast Growing Trees has in-house experts ready to help you make the right selection, with growing and care advice available 24/7. You can talk to a plant expert about your soil type, landscape design, how to take care of your plants, and everything else that you need. No green thumb required. This spring, they have the best deals online, up to half off on select plants and other deals. And listeners to our show get an additional 15% off their first purchase when using the code MAJORITY at checkout. That's an additional 15% off at fastgrowingtrees.com using the code MAJORITY at checkout. Fastgrowingtrees.com, code MAJORITY. Offer is valid for a limited time. Terms and conditions may apply. All right, folks, we will be right back, and we'll be speaking to Jeremy Gantz. We are back, and we are joined now by Jeremy Gantz, contributing editor of In These Times, whose piece in These Times is entitled 2 Years In, These Progressive Companies Still Haven't Negotiated First Union Contracts. And I should say progressive is in quotes. Thanks so much for coming on the show today, Jeremy. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
So on Monday, we were speaking about the historic victory at the Chattanooga plant in Tennessee, the VW Chattanooga plant. But I think a lot of the new, renewed focus on labor, I guess, from a national perspective, came in part due to the Starbucks organizing, right? Starbucks was at the forefront of this. Workers at Starbucks pushing off this unionization effort. I guess that was last year, really, or a few years ago, maybe.
More than 2 years ago.
More than 2 years ago, right? You write that. And yet the company is still slow walking this entire process and trying to prevent their employees from unionizing. What is the status of that situation?
Well, there seems to be some real developments in terms of bargaining, restarting. In fact, it's a really appropriate we're talking today because right now, I believe in Atlanta, representatives from the Workers United Starbucks union are actually sitting down with corporate representatives for Starbucks, and that's the first time they've done that in I think more than a year. So what's happened is after really a pretty brutal opposition, intense opposition from the company for really the better part of 2 years, the company has changed its stance and its signal and appears to be more open to bargaining a first contract with baristas and other Starbucks employees around the country. And that is a big deal. However, I think it's worth noting that, it's unclear if things really will accelerate. Starbucks has said it wants to negotiate a first contract by the end of 2024, which would be a remarkable turnaround given the real lack of progress over the last 2 years,
right,
where they've slowed down the unionization, the contracting process in a number of ways, including fights in court.
Right. And I mean, the NLRB has filed over 100 complaints against Starbucks, but they're such a massive corporation that they have the ability to kind of eat that cost and still slow walk things.
Right.
I mean, have they responded to this new NLRB rule that basically says that if companies engage in union busting, that immediately triggers, I think, either an election. Bradley, I was, what's the clarity on that? Maybe you know, Jeremy, that new NLRB rule. Is it basically pressure from them that is resulting in them kind of saying now 2024?
No, I don't think it's so much about the NLRB, and I think more broadly speaking, the NLRB has pretty limited tools to sanction companies who break the law around in terms of their treatment of workers who are unionizing. I think, and I'm just speculating, the company had a new CEO come in last year. We also saw a series of one-day walkouts and strikes in November by hundreds, if not thousands, of Starbucks unionized workers around the country. And the fights just dragged on. And I think Starbucks has maybe felt some financial pain. It's hard to say exactly why they decided to change their tune. And again, we haven't seen substantive progress yet come out of the bargaining, but this is the first day, and that's a really good step forward. I would say the new stance from the company probably has more to do with its reputational damage it suffered than anything the NLRB has done in recent months.
And that reputational damage is what you speak about and allude to, the fact that Starbucks for years had kind of touted their progressive bona fides, the fact that they are supportive of college education for their employees. I remember when Starbucks was exploding on the scene all across the country, it was always portrayed as a company that was ethical, and yet they've engaged in some of the most aggressive union busting that we've seen.
Yeah, I think it stands in stark contrast to, I think, the company's efforts and other policies it has that would be considered more progressive by a national corporation. What we've seen in the last few years since the first Starbucks unionized in Buffalo, New York, is one of the most, I think, aggressive national union busting campaigns that I can recall. And I think it's because the stakes are so high for the company. And we know also from things that Howard Schultz said, who is the former CEO and the founder of Starbucks, that he's really just deeply opposed to unions at the company. And so they really fought tooth and nail and ended up in court. And the NLRB found in the workers' favor dozens of times in terms of illegal actions by the company. So, I think the stakes are really high, and I think it's going to be really, really exciting. I'm trying to remain hopeful that what comes out of today's sessions and what comes out of the next few months really does represent progress in the contract negotiation process. If they get a first contract this year or even next year, that would be a historic moment, I think, for the labor movement in this country. So just to back up a second, you started off by mentioning the VW victory. Why this is so important, and why I wanted to look a little, kind of check in with the article I wrote, both at Trader Joe's and REI, is that the retail sector has been hard to unionize. And part of that has to do with, you have these companies where they have hundreds of stores around the country, but they're different workplaces. It's just a tough slog, as opposed to one large auto plant, which I don't mean to say that's easy. That's also very hard. But I think for these retail companies, it's been really hard for unions to make inroads and for workers to really successfully step up and organize.
And that's in part also due to the fact that, as you say, at one plant, you can basically have trust building between workers, conversations that you can have either, in person or through your social networks at the plant that you're working at, versus smaller stores. And there have been hundreds of stores that engaged in the strike and did labor actions for Starbucks in particular. But it's very much smaller workplaces, as you say, and then way more widely dispersed. And same goes for Trader Joe's REI.
Yeah, and part of it is the high turnover rate, which the retail industry more generally has. And when you have more workers coming and going, it's harder to build and sustain a union campaign. And And that's been true for a while in the retail sector. Obviously, the low wages have something to do with that, which is, of course, what these workers are fighting for, is wage, among other things, is wage increases. But when you have high turnover rates, that just makes it harder to sustain a successful campaign.
Starbucks is also, and I think did Trader Joe's join it, challenging the NLRB's authority at the Supreme Court. They there was a case that was heard either yesterday or today on this. What's the status of that challenge?
Well, so there's sort of two things going on, and it gets into some arcane legal stuff, but I don't want to get into the weeds too much. But there's sort of two tracks, and one is the SpaceX-led lawsuit, which is really more directly challenging the constitutionality of the NLRB. And they filed that lawsuit in Texas, in an area with a lot of sort of hard right activist judges. Starbucks, Trader Joe's, and Amazon have in different ways signaled support for that lawsuit in their own filings relative to the union campaigns they've faced. However, Starbucks has not officially joined the SpaceX lawsuit. What happened yesterday, and I think this is great to talk about because it really kind of, it's almost like, there's parallel pictures here. Today, like I said, Starbucks has resumed bargaining with workers. That's great. Yesterday, they were, I believe it was yesterday, the Supreme Court heard a case that Starbucks pushed. And in that case, what they're really trying to do is curtail the NLRB's ability to force the reinstatement of workers who were illegally fired. And it looks like, from the reports I've read of the Supreme Court hearing yesterday, that Starbucks will probably prevail in that case. So that's a little different. That's not the case where, the NLRB is going to be blown up, but it will, I think, curtail the NLRB's ability with its pretty limited tool set to force companies to take back the workers that they should not have fired.
Is there recourse for them or potential recourse for Starbucks, Trader Joe's delaying these negotiations with the union and kind of dragging their feet?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. And I think it gets to the heart of what's been so challenging about these union campaigns, is that it gets at the structure, the nature of the national legal infrastructure, the laws that are in place around the country at the federal level. There's very little that the NLRB or a union can do to force a company to bargain in good faith, to really come to the table and have real conversations to move the ball forward toward a first contract. So, that's what makes these have really dragged on across these different companies now for about 2 years, which is a lot of time. And over that time, people get demoralized. There's a lot of turnover. So there's a lot of delay strategies. But the short answer is that, the government can't, the NLRB really doesn't have the ability they can mete out, I would say, small fines. These are basically, no money to a company like Starbucks. Right. And so that just doesn't force change.
And turning away from Starbucks just for a second to touch on Trader Joe's and REI, where are they at in their negotiations with their employees they're unionizing?
Yeah, and I think I went back and I talked to them after the news about Starbucks resuming the negotiations. So the short answer is, I think they're not as far along. There aren't as many REI stores and Trader Joe's stores that are unionized. There are now 5, I think it's 4 or 5 Trader Joe's stores, and now there are 10 REI locations around the country that have unionized. So not a huge number, but they have steadily kept the momentum going. And there was actually just a successful election in California of another REI site last month. And so I talked to workers involved with these campaigns, and they just talk about these bargaining sessions where really nothing happens. They never really get to substantive issues with the union representatives or the lawyers representing the company. They still don't have really any contractual details worked out. There are a couple with REI for the store in Manhattan, But again, part of what's so hard here is that, the companies are requiring, they want to have separate negotiations for each store location. And so that alone just drags things out. And what's different with Starbucks now, and this is really promising, again, we'll see what happens, is that the company has signaled a willingness to negotiate a national framework for a contract. And instead of having like 400 different contracts, they'll have a kind of a template that could be used at all stores that are unionized. And that can help speed things up. So, I think Trader Joe's and REI are definitely further, are not as far along. And what I think is really going to be interesting to see this year is how much does progress, if it occurs on the Starbucks front, how much does that impact movement with REI and Trader Joe's? Will that maybe make Trader Joe's and REI's corporate leaders be more conciliatory and say, well, you know what? If Starbucks ended up playing ball with the union, then maybe we should just cut our losses and get back to the table to really move the needle on this.
And there are also more stores, like you wrote in your piece that baristas at 21 Starbucks stores have declared that they're going to be unionizing. There's another effort in California for REI, Trader Joe's in Chicago. That also puts pressure, I would imagine, on the company, the more stores that move in this direction.
Yeah, and that's kind of where I landed with my article and talking to the worker organizers, is that I feel like the continued pressure, momentum to organize more stores, I think, especially at Starbucks, because as you just mentioned, there was I think in the same day in February earlier this year, 21 additional Starbucks stores announced their intent to unionize. And I think that just signals to the company that this fight is not going away, and we can't just wait them out, which I think has been the strategy. So, I think the continued momentum with Trader Joe's and REI is only going to sort of, I think, force or hopefully change the dynamic as time goes on.
Well, Jeremy Gantz, contributing editor of In These Times, the piece is called 2 Years In, These Progressive Companies Still Haven't Negotiated First Union Contracts. Everyone should be reading In These Times to keep up on labor news, as well as there have been some great pieces that you guys have done over there on Israel and Gaza. Thanks so much, Jeremy. Really appreciate your time today.
Thanks, Emma.
All right, folks, quick break, and when we come back, we'll be talking to Leah Goodridge. We are back, and we are joined now by Leah Goodridge, Tenants rights attorney, commissioner on the New York City Planning Commission, and former member of the New York City Rent Guidelines Board. Leah, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I'm excited to be speaking to you because, housing is at the forefront of many, many people's minds right now. I think we're on our way to some sort of reckoning about affordable housing and housing prices and rent in this country. We're hitting a bit of a breaking point. What is your assessment in your work in New York City on what you're seeing about really just out of control rent throughout all of the boroughs?
Yeah. And, I was born in New York and grew up here. And so to be on the Planning Commission, it's been an interesting experience, an overall positive experience, but it also gives me a bird's eye view about the housing crisis. And so I get to hear from relatives, from friends, and myself about how it's impacting us. And then you're on this commission and you get a chance to do something about it, and you realize that it's not so easy. So for example, one of the things that I talk about frequently that I was surprised to learn is that the levels of affordability, unfortunately, for sometimes low income or affordable housing are actually very high. So for example, sometimes if you make $25,000, that might actually be too low to qualify for some of the affordable housing.
And when did those rules get put in place in terms of what the thresholds are for affordable housing?
A long time ago by HUD, that's the U.S. Housing and Urban Development Department.
Yeah.
And so those particular, it's called the area median income, and that's set by HUD. And so it's been sort of the bane of the existence of a lot of tenant advocates for a very long time. And I should say, I've been in the tenants' rights movement for 12 years, and that was in large part about why I was appointed to the commission. I was actually the first legal aid tenants' rights attorney put on the commission. And so I come with that perspective. I'm always talking through the lens of a tenant advocate and a tenant myself.
Right. And you spoke briefly about your experiences on the commission. What did you see about, say, the influence of real estate associations, of big kind of corporate luxury developers? Eric Adams, we know, on his transition committee was basically stacked it with luxury developers and kind of these bigwig real estate folks. They seem to dominate the conversation here. Is that your experience?
I think that I have been disappointed sometimes when we are talking about the housing crisis, about how much the lens, it sounds very weird. I think people will think it's weird to hear, but the lens is actually not through a tenant lens. Sometimes when you hear about the housing crisis, it's through this kind of, it's almost this narrative of landlords are the little guy, and tenants are not paying rent. Tenants are squatters. Tenants are evil. And so we need to protect landlords. Where that comes up with developers is this sort of actually tenants and maybe even homeowners are the problem because they're blocking housing and developers are the good guys and want to bring in housing. Now, let me just say, I believe that we have a housing shortage and we need to build more housing. But I think that sometimes these housing discussions, they get very rote because for a lot of people, it literally just stops there. It's as if that is going to be the cure for everything. And it's not. We need to have more conversations, like I said, about affordability. We need to have more conversations about bedroom sizes. That's another big thing. Sometimes people think that, you just put in a whole bunch of housing, a whole bunch of one bedrooms and studios, and that's it. And that doesn't account for the families, right? If you have a family of children and parents, or even just extended family with grandparents, what does a studio and a one bedroom do? So these are the kinds of conversations that we need to be having.
And I mean, there's a shortage of housing in general, but there's also an even greater shortage of affordable housing, as you say. How much of that is driven by the Faircloth Amendment and the federal government basically since 98, 99, if I recall, barring and limiting the number of affordable housing units and barring federal funding for it?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is the way that this plays out on the local level is that, private developers have kind of been given the okay to take the lead in terms of building more housing. So I think, what you hear is well, why doesn't the city just build more Michelamas, or why doesn't the city build its own housing? Why is it private developers that are expected to build all of the housing? Because the way that it plays out is that's how you get into these fights, because then the local community says, well, there's only 20% of affordable housing units, and those start at $60,000 for eligibility. We're not going to accept this. We're going to protest. We don't want this. And then the private developer says, okay, well, I'm not going to put up more of my money. I don't have it. And so then that's literally how I would say a good majority of the fights start. And I want to just take a step back here and say that starts in large part because we have this scenario where the private developer is pitched as the sort of like person to save the day. And so what I've said from the beginning is that government needs to take and invest in a lot more of the affordable housing units. We can't just expect for private developers to take it, because that's another conversation altogether about what housing looks like when it's controlled by private developers, because profit is always going to be over people.
Well, also, if you have more affordable housing and the government gets involved in providing it, it can drive prices down because there's more competition, and the government model is not, it's to shelter people as opposed to being for profit or creating these luxury apartments here in the city that are just speculative assets for people, where you can purchase these luxury apartments driving the cost of housing up, but they're empty in Midtown Manhattan.
Yeah. And, so
And
I
other
was
places.
also, before joining the commission, I was on what was called the New York City Rent Guidelines Board. And that sets the rent for rent stabilized and rent regulated apartments. And so one of the big arguments that we would hear from landlords is, oh, well, that this is getting into the private developer model is, well, do you want public housing? Look how bad New York City Housing Authority is. Look how bad it looks like when government runs housing. That's why we need to come in and save the day. So there are a lot of policy arguments. And of course, I, as a tenant advocate, our response to that is that's in large part because there hasn't been enough money invested in there.
Yes.
Right. And that's where we advocate. That's why I've been an advocate for funding appropriately affordable housing. Okay. When we have situations where it's corporatized, let me give you some examples of things that play out that I see on the ground.
Sure.
One is, we do have rent stabilization in New York City. It's about 41% of the housing stock in New York City is rent stabilized. And so now, if you go on foot to try to find an apartment, the number one thing is you're probably not going to find it by yourself. You're going to find it by a broker. Okay. Because we have this system where it's brokers and the tenant has to pay the broker, not the person who hires the broker, which is a landlord. So you find a rent stabilized apartment through a broker because you saw a listing, and then you know what they tell you. Let's say the rent stabilized apartment is $1,500. They say, well, you know what? Yeah, you have to pay first month's rent, last month's rent, and then a 15 or 20% annual broker fee for me because I helped you find a rent stabilized apartment.
Oh, and you know what they do?
Some of these have gone up to $20,000.
Oh my gosh. I mean, look, I went through this last year. You know what they do? They call you and they give you a lockbox code and you go in and see the apartment yourself, and then I'm supposed to pay.
You don't even see it, right? They don't even do anything right. And the funny thing is, and because I hear this a lot from people, I talk to tenants every day. You're getting, you have to get there within like 2 hours, right? Or else the apartment is gone.
Yep.
Which is a symptom of the housing shortage. But again, I'm also pointing out about how things play out when you have, this sort of corporatized system about how that's a perfect example of profits over people, right? We have the affordable housing, and there's even been, cases that have gone at the federal court claiming that, rent stabilization, one of the criticisms is, oh, anyone can live there. So it's not income restricted. It's not means tested. And therefore, why do we even have it? But now we have a system where you can't even access it if you are low income, because then you have to pay the broker thousands of dollars just to get it.
Yep. Yeah. It's sometimes like somewhere from 8 to 12 to even up to 15% of your year-long contract, of your year-long rent, basically, which is tens of thousands of dollars, thousands of dollars. Why are brokers' fees legal? And why? I mean,
Exactly.
I mean, it should be illegal, but if it even exists, it makes zero sense for the prospective tenant to be paying it, because in theory, the broker is advertising the property for rental. Why is the tenant paying it as opposed to the landlord?
Yeah, and I land with the last part. Like, you want to have broker fees if, they're doing their job. However, I didn't hire the broker as the tenant. And so if you're the landlord and you hire them, you should pay them, right? And so this has actually been a battle in New York City for going on decades. There was a little quick revamp of this a couple of years ago, and it quickly went back. I mean, we could have a whole show,
Right,
whole
where did it
series on just
go?
that.
Yeah, right. Anyway.
So right now there is a council member, Chiose, who has proposed the Fair Act to rectify this so that it is not the tenant who pays the broker fees. We'll see how that goes. But the last I heard of it, it was still being considered. So we'll see.
Yeah. Well, I hope. What about the prospects of a vacancy tax for some of these empty apartments that are again being used as speculative assets that people don't live in? Is that a possibility for the future to combat this?
Yeah, there's been some bills proposed. I believe the assembly member is Rosenthal that proposed some bills about. There's been a couple of bills proposed about this, and so it's been an ongoing conversation about what to do, especially because in New York City right now, one of the huge battles has been landlords don't like rent stabilization. They don't want it. And so landlords of rent stabilized buildings, some of them are specifically choosing to not rent out the apartment to keep it empty. And so this is where this question of vacancy taxes come up, where we have a housing shortage, but then we also have landlords who aren't renting them out. And from their viewpoint, they're claiming, I don't want to rent it out because I'm not going to make enough profits on it. You're regulating the amount of rent that I can charge. And so because of that, it's not worth it to rent it out. It has too many repairs, blah, 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 blah. And so, here we are again in a situation, where it's profits over people.
Right. Are they being earnest when they say that, though? I mean, or is it just basically because they may have other properties and a housing shortage helps benefit them in other areas in basically driving up prices for their other properties?
I just had an interview this morning, and I was discussing the housing deal with a governor pushed by. And one of the things that tenant advocates are not happy about are the rent increases and the renovations. So when you ask, are they being earnest about it? One of the things that has popped up over the years is, having to do all of these repairs and pay this money. For many years, a lot of those repairs were framed as renovations, but they were actually repairs. And that would result in rent increases for tenants. Do I think that they're being earnest overall? As a tenant advocate, from what I see, no. I think that they just don't like the rent stabilization system. The other thing I want to point out on that is that no one forces you to be a landlord. You don't have like someone is putting your hand and then you happen to buy a building and then you're like, oh my God, it's rent stabilized. How could I? All of this information. You go in, you're choosing a business. And so that you're going to be a rent stabilized landlord. So I think for me, it has been a lot to take in of this sort of framework of I can't believe I bought a rent stabilized building. Rent stabilization must go. Now, I do think that there are some valid concerns about the structure of the buildings and needing to have them up, needing the upkeep of them, especially a lot of the older buildings. Those are things that, again, should be done periodically, not, after 20 years and then asking for a renovation, by the way. But I do think that obviously those are issues and those are valid issues. Do I think that those turn into an issue of where we should not have rent stabilization entirely? No.
Absolutely. And the fact it's already under threat. The idea that rent stabilization is being attacked in this current moment is really a terrifying prospect. Could you speak? I know that the Supreme Court declined to hear a case from New York City landlords, but Clarence Thomas, in his reasoning, cracked the door open for them to return to the Supreme Court to challenge rent stabilization.
Yeah, so I'll lead with an example. I posted on Twitter maybe last week about a rent stabilized tenant who found her apartment 30 years ago for $250 and has been living there in her rent stabilized apartment for 30 years. And all of the sort of critics came out like, this is a prime example of why rent stabilization is such a terrible thing in America. Like the fact that someone could live there for 30 years. So this example has actually kind of been at the center of these several cases in federal court that the landlords have brought against the city and also against rent guidelines board members. I was part of some of the cases because I was at the time on the board. And so they, from their vantage point, they see this as a taking. They see this as this is their private property. And when someone is able to be a tenant, a lifelong tenant, and they basically cannot terminate, at a private unregulated apartment, when the lease is up, that's it. You can just terminate the tenancy and that's it. They have to go. You can't do that in a rent stabilized apartment. So from their vantage point, one of their arguments is that it amounts to a taking of their property. They make a couple of takings arguments from they say succession rights, part of it. So all of it for them is, in a nutshell, let's, wade through the legalese and just say in a nutshell, their argument is this is my private property. And when you have a system where I cannot easily get rid of the tenant, it makes it less of my property and more of the government's. And so it essentially amounts to a taking. One of the other arguments, the questions that they asked the Supreme Court is, this is a sort of view of like, you're changing private property into this sort of like public housing stock of where it's regulated and where it has all of these rules. And so is that really fair to put on private owners? So they bring a lot of claims, but in a nutshell, those are the big ones.
Gotcha. Well, I don't need to editorialize. I think it's clear how I feel about it, but can you expand a little bit on this? Do you have like a little bit more time? I'd love to, ask you a few more questions.
Anything for you.
Oh, thank you, Leah. Can you expand on what you were talking about earlier and just alluded to it, how landlords present themselves as the kind of victims in the situation or the aggrieved party? And we've had this flipping of the power dynamics at play here between the people that own property and people who have to rent because they cannot own property. What are your observations about the way that dynamic is portrayed and some of the misnomers about landlords in particular?
Well, I think the first part is that, we have this standard, especially in America, where, there's an expectation that like, the goal for everyone is to be a homeowner. The goal for everyone is to earn property. And that's fine if you want to be a homeowner. That's completely fine. But not everyone wants to own a home. And so sometimes when you have people who are fighting for tenants' rights, there's this kind of undercurrent of like, you're the underclass. Like, why are you even still a tenant? So that framing pops up a lot in these discussions of tenant and landlord, sort of like, why are you even a tenant in the first place? Like, you're supposed to temporarily be a tenant. And so the fact that you're 30 years as a tenant is some type of moral failing. So that's the first thing that I think frames a lot of the discussions. And then as part of that, you have this other type of framing of like, landlords are the little guy, landlords are having tenants who were scamming them. When there was, for example, the eviction moratorium, one of the main things that I heard was, oh, what about the landlords? Like what, we had in the very beginning of the pandemic, we had we're talking like March 2020, where we were like, what the hell is going on? And as part of that, one of the issues is we have to think about, do we want in the middle of this contagious, epidemic, people being evicted and roaming the street, we're still trying to figure this out. So we had this eviction moratorium. And I mean, they hated it. And so, one of the things that would pop up there is, I cannot believe that this could even happen to landlords. They're, ruining the American dream here. They're taking their property, physical taking, and this is outrageous. So I think there's this dynamic constantly of like, of like the tenants being scammers and, not being ethical or moral or truthful and somehow taking something away from the landlord. And a lot of people have this mindset, including police, including a lot of people in the public. And so this plays out in a lot of ways. It plays out with the squatter debates. It also plays out when there's violence between tenants and landlords. And this happens quite a bit. The tenants end up being killed by the landlord.
I saw you have a whole thread on tenants killed by their landlords.
Yeah.
And I want to get to squatters' rights in a second, but what's your read on how many of these landlords are kind of small mom and pop property owners versus these massive corporations that own property? Because I feel like landlords in the way that the conversation is framed are often it's the little guy. He saved up to buy a house and is renting his basement apartment or something. But that's a minority of the situations.
Yeah, it is a minority, especially in New York. But I think we also need to recognize that nationwide, we are having this corporate takeover. We are having LLCs that are taking over entire neighborhoods, buying them up. And some of the small landlords, what their arguments, at least in New York City, have been is that's why we don't want that to happen. So that's why you should support us. That's why you should support small landlords, because you want small mom and pop landlords. You don't want the corporate LLC takeovers. The problem, of course, is that then we get to part two, and then they're like, and that's why we're part of this case against rent stabilization. Then we're like, okay, yeah, this isn't going to work out. So, it's a very complex issue. But to answer your question, no, they are not the majority of landlords. In fact, corporate LLCs are taking over. However, conveniently, they are often the face of the landlord movement, if you will. There was a great Teen Vogue article about this, about why that is so convenient.
Right. Teen Vogue doing great work over there.
I know.
Profiling, I'm sorry, I'm blanking on her name, but Ilhan Omar's daughter, who just recently got suspended from Columbia for her activism. Yeah, it's amazing how
they do. I think that was Lexi, who I worked with, actually. We were coworkers.
Oh, nice. Well,
at a former social justice organization.
Great piece by your friend there. So, squatters' rights. There's a lot of misinformation about squatters' rights. They are tenants' rights, right? It's basically protecting the tenants. But what do they constitute? Why is it framed as squatters' rights as well versus tenants' rights? Just if you could expand on that.
Yeah. So let me just expand. So when we say squatter, and keep in mind, laws are different in each state and each city. So let me just provide a very general legal view of a squatter. A squatter is a person who takes over property unlawfully. They don't have any legal authority to be there. So they do not have a lease. They don't have verbal consent. Oftentimes the person literally doesn't even know that the owner doesn't even know that they're there. So I want you to literally imagine like this idea of like you're coming home and you see a complete stranger and you're like, what are you doing here? And they're like, I live here. I want you to keep that in mind as like what we would envision a squatter. Now that is very different from a tenant who's had a lease, the lease is over, or the lease is still going. A person wants to evict them, and instead of going through the court process, they just change the locks and they're like, you shouldn't be here anymore. That is not a squatter. This has been an example that has been in the news as a squatter. I'm like, I look at it and I'm like, this is not a squatter.
Right.
This is a person who has, legal authority to be there, and you have to go through the courts in order to evict them. And you don't want to do that. So, now it's like, oh, this person, I don't think this person has legal authority to be here. I don't want to pay the eviction process. So they're a squatter.
And the squatters sometimes, though, when they go into vacant properties, it's because they're seeking shelter. And that's not always the case.
Because they're seeking shelter. I think, and just to provide a little bit of context. So I've been on the commission. I'm also a tenants' rights attorney. I've been a tenants' rights attorney for 12 years, and a tenants' rights attorney specifically that represents low-income people and nonprofit. And as part of that, I have only had one squatter case in 12 years. So I think just to provide some context, like it is not You know, a lot of us are like, what are they talking about? Like, if we're going to see squatters cases, if anyone's going to see them, we're going to see them, right? Because they are generally going to be low income people. We're not seeing them. So that's number one, is like a practitioner's perspective on the ground. You know, I think, again, there has been a real attack on tenants' rights nationwide from different angles, from rent stabilization, and not just tenants' housing rights, homelessness. And so this fits into that framework of like, they're literally taking the visual of like, this is my property I worked so hard for, and someone just comes and takes it over. Right. So that is not, you know, I've seen some in the news where I'm like, okay, the attorney general is involved. This is the one squatter case. But some of them I've seen and I'm like, this is not a squatter case. Well, this is being framed as a squatter case, but this is not a squatter case.
Right, exactly. So there's that distinction that you're making is really important. And then just also emphasizing how rare squatting really is. There's a lot of sensationalism.
At least in New York. At least in New York. Now, there are places that have what's called blighted properties, like abandoned properties. That have been, you know, someone bought a property and then they haven't visited it in years. And then someone may go and live there, right? They don't have the authority to live there. That might be an example. So I think New York City is going to be very different from other cities that have these issues.
Sure.
And in those cities, by the way, a lot of those cities are trying to, you know, revamp them by having the $1 program where they sell those properties for $1. And then they are hoping that, you know, people will renovate them and take them over. But that's another housing issue.
Gotcha. All right. Well, I really appreciate your extended time today. Leah Goodridge.
Thank you.
Tenants' rights attorney, commissioner on the New York City Planning Commission, former member of the New York City Rent Guidelines Board. I'm sure we'll be reaching back out when the next kind of sensationalist story about tenants and landlords comes out. Thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me.
All right, guys, with that, we will wrap up the free part of this program and head into the fun half, where we will take your calls and read your IMs and all of that good stuff.
There's a metaphor I'd like to make, the way that Zionists are pointing to college campuses as mass graves are found, for instance.
Right.
It's the same way that the capitalist press, very much influenced by real estate, is pointing to squatters. Which again, like we talked about squatters and how it's not our problem. While tenants are lighting themselves on fire, like elderly tenants, lighting themselves on fire instead of being thrown out because their landlord wants to jack up rent $500. And it is these. I dismissed a sort of distraction theory of politics a little bit ago because, like, I do think people oversimplify things as if the world is a theatrical performance meant to bamboozle the audience. But there is a concerted effort to, you know, raise certain concerns by certain class of people, whether it's Zionists or real estate landlords, when there's actual brutality going on, whether it's against Palestinians or against people that are struggling to pay rent.
Yeah, I thought Leah was great. That was helpful and I think probably informative for people because of that very dynamic you're saying. Like, the media coverage of this is dominated by one end, in the same way crime is, by the way. Overrepresented
by retailers' concerns.
Retailers, right? And then in this instance, it's landlord associations, real estate associations, and more. Oh, I should have read this on air to her, I meant to say, but Dizzle McFizzle said, is there a way to nominate the guest for sainthood? Because if I had to deal with landlords on a daily basis, I would become an arsonist. LOL. Left his vest.
Easy.
Yeah.
We need more
when
supply.
When I worked for the city, that was one of the things I hated the most was
landlords.
Talking to I hated, it was two different issues. I hated talking to commercial landlords because I always knew that they were sort of lying to me. And I hated talking to smaller landlords because they always tried to make it seem like every time I would talk to them, they'd be like, "What would you do if you had this going on in your house? Where do you live?" Like,
right.
and I was like, I can't change the law.
Yeah.
The law is you can't evict this person.
Right.
Like,
yeah. Well,
I'm not going to help you evict this person.
And you told me because I was having enormous issues with the safety of my apartment, which, by the way, is rent stabilized, and that's part of why they let it go fall apart. And you were like, the only way that they're going to do anything is if you file a complaint with the city, and I did, and that's how it got fixed.
Yeah, it's truly like it's when you have a hammer, you need to use it.
Yeah, exactly.
against an annoying nail.
The only reason, my apartment got fixed. Anyway, on ESPN yesterday, we talked about. I mean, again, like now there were 3 NBA games last night, 4 NHL games. A little out of date, but we analyzed the series up until this point. Talked about the Knicks, talked about the Timberwolves, Anthony Edwards, Damian Lillard's 35-point performance in Game 1, although the Pacers evened it up last night.
They're in trouble.
You think so?
Yeah, I mean, unless Giannis comes back, I don't think they can beat the Pacers.
Yeah, I hear that. They can score, and Tyrese Halliburton is another future face of the league guy.
Pascal Siakam.
Oh, yeah.
14-foot turnaround jumpers all night.
He had what, like 37 points?
Yeah, the same sort of thing he does all the time. I saw Siakam play. I saw we were talking before the show because you were at your Rangers game, but
yes.
I saw last year, the last NBA game I went to was when Kyrie and KD were on the Nets, and how pleased I feel to have done that and saw them at sort of the height of their powers. But person. Siakam was also on that team, and like the ferocity that he drives is just something to see, like giant men move like that.
Yeah, that was a great pickup for the Pacers. So we talked about all that, and then I did my NFL mock draft. The draft is tomorrow. I don't want to talk about it. It's very anxiety inducing because the Giants may go quarterback. We'll see. But that is youtube.com/ESVN show, and we'll be back on Monday for a new show. Matt, what is happening on Left Reckoning?
Left Reckoning, we had 2 activists from Uncommitted New Jersey on to talk about, just trying to engage in the political process that seems hell-bent on supporting genocide, regardless of who the 2 main candidates feel about it, or even Bobby Kennedy, a anti-war Zionist somehow. Check that out, patreon.com/Left Reckoning. We talked about Tucker Carlson, who believes in UFOs but thinks they're like angels or demons now, and how he's like sort of pivoting to this like Christian thing because maybe I'm the new Mark Lane, or sort of like JFK assassination buff, like that beat's actually pretty covered, pretty competitive, and maybe if your dad worked for an intelligence news organization, you don't have the best credibility to be doing some of that. So patreon.com/Left Reckoning.
Dave from The Apprentice says, wait, are we not supposed to be tipping our landlords? I'm assuming that's sarcastic. Do not tip your landlords. The rent is the tip. Although maybe tip the people that repair things. I do that sometimes, repair things in the apartment.
It's fun because I have one of the sort of small landlords. I'm the only tenant. And it's nice in that I haven't, my rent is in like 10 years has only raised $200. But the bad news is like not a single renovation or upgrade has happened that entire time. But I'm cool with it.
Anyway, all right, guys, 646-257-3920. See you in the fun half.
3 months from now, 6 months from now, 9 months from now, and I don't think it's going to be the same as it looks like in 6 months from now, and I don't know if it's necessarily going to be better 6 months from now than it is 3 months from now, but I think around 18 months out, we're going to look back and go like, wow. What is that going on? It's nuts. Wait a second. Hold on for a second.
The Majority Report.
Emma, welcome to the program.
Hey.
Matt.
What is up, everyone?
Nomiki.
You did it.
Let's go, Brandon.
Let's go, Brandon.
Bradley, you want to say hello?
Sorry to disappoint everyone. I'm just a random guy.
It's all the boys today.
Fundamentally false.
No, I'm sorry.
Stop talking for a second and let me finish.
Where is this coming from, dude?
But dude, you want to smoke this 7A?
Yes.
Yes.
Is this me?
Is it me?
It is you.
Is this me? Hello, is this me?
I think it is you. Who is you? No sound. Every single freaking day. What's on your mind?
Sports. We can discuss free markets and we can discuss capitalism.
I'm gonna go start watching.
Libertarians. They're so stupid, though. Common sense says, of course.
Gobbledygook.
We fucking nailed him.
So what's 79 plus 21?
Challenge met.
I'm positively quivering.
I believe 96, I want to say.
857-210-35. 501. 1/2. 3/8.
9/11, for instance.
$3,400, $1,900.
6, 5, 4, $3 trillion sold. It's a zero-sum game.
Actually, you're making me think less of it.
But let me say this. Poop.
You can call it satire. Sam goes, it's satire.
On top of it all,
Yeah.
my favorite part about you is just like every day, all day, like everything you do.
Without a doubt. Hey, buddy, we see you. All right, folks.
It's just the weak being weeded out, obviously.
Yeah, sun's out, guns out. I don't know.
But you should know.
People just don't like to entertain ideas anymore.
I have a question. Who cares?
Our chat is enabled, folks.
I love it.
I do love that.
Look, gotta jump. Gotta be quick. I gotta jump.
I'm losing it, bro.
2 o'clock. We're already late, and the guy's being a dick. So screw him. Sent to a gulag?
Outrageous.
Like, what is wrong with you?
Love you, bye.
Love you. Bye-bye.
We are back. We have called into the phone lines. Thank you, Bradley. Turning off the voicemail. The number is 646-257-3920. Swamp Donkey, relatable Bradley. When people talk to me in that parent discipline tone, my blood boils. Nico from Wisconsin, as a Bucks fan, they aren't winning anything as long as this team is this old and injured, and Doc Rivers is the coach. Well, I'm here. Doc Rivers, we said that as soon as he got hired.
Yeah, that's tough. They made a big mistake coaching-wise at the start of the season, and Doc Rivers was not the solution to it.
No, but he was speaking in the owner's ear and whispering sweet nothings, and he got his, millionth chance.
Owners, the reason the Chicago Bulls only won 6 championships.
Dragon Rider, unfair that inflation is already factored into rent stabilization in New York State, but not with Social Security or wages. It's not like the tenants are paying $25 a month from 1920. It's adjusted. Yes, exactly. Not Austin from PA said just a small step in the larger picture. Not sure. Oh, this was a second IM after. Not Austin from PA says, do you think pushing the broker fee onto the landlords will encourage them to do away with brokers altogether? Or will it just increase the rent prices because landlords already know people can, quote, afford these insane prices, afford in quotes? Well, I mean, brokers should be for homes that you purchase. And I don't even understand what the purpose is. You just advertise on the internet and people come and tour the apartments and then they can rent. There should be no middleman here.
To the extent this stuff is operating algorithmically, here's a time slot to go check out this property if you want it, that can be done by the state.
Yeah.
The secret about this industry is it is money for nothing.
Mm-hmm.
You watch and I think I can thank these Netflix reality shows like Selling Sunset and Buying Beverly Hills. It is a playground for rich people who have connections to make money for absolutely just being there.
Yep.
They barely even know how many rooms are in the house sometimes because they're nepotism cases. I'm sure some of the agents who aren't on TV know how many outlets and stuff there are, but these aren't serious jobs for how much money. I apologize to anybody with it. I know there's probably a long tail of people who are struggling on it and hustling for some conglomeration or whatever, but these jobs are compensated way beyond what they offer to society, and it should be taxed. Like the real estate stuff should be taxed in general, and these sorts of fees. It's all because, again, like there's a whole surplus of profit here because the industry has people over a barrel for a life necessity.
Mike from Seasteading. From I don't know, in the ocean, whatever. Seasteading. Okay. Stop stealing valor, Emma. It was my birthday last night, and I drank whiskey while crying to celebrate turning 41. Well, Mike, happy birthday. Ghost of Limbaugh says, I voted uncommitted yesterday in the PA primary. I wouldn't have known about that movement without you all. Also, quick question for you. What do you all think about the commentator Mike from PA? Well, Mike writes in or calls into the show.
Time,
yeah. I can't say, I don't watch a ton of political shows, honestly, so I can't speak to his work, but he's great caller, and yeah.
What was the first part of that message? There's something I wanted to respond to that.
Voted uncommitted that they wouldn't have known about it without the show. The write-in uncommitted campaign. Let's turn here to some clips, shall we?